Welcome back to Mrs. Montgomery Mondays, where we minister about the Master. It all started March 16th, 2011, around midnight. It was a Wednesday, and we were in the bedroom of my apartment on West Ocean View Avenue in Norfolk, Virginia. I was sitting on the front left-hand side of the bed, and he lay diagonally from me on the back right-hand side of the bed. I decided to move closer to him. As I began to scoot backwards towards him, I didn't pay any attention to his eyes at first, but I got close enough to him to where my back was against his chest and he was facing towards me. It wasn't until I finally looked him directly into his face moments later that I realized that his eyes had become completely dark with no white around his pupils and that they were opened as far as they could go. His head was slightly cocked to the side and he was grinning. It was at this very moment that for the first time ever in my entire life, I felt fear overtake me. I became instantly afraid. Immediately, while trembling from the inside out, I began to slowly scoot away from him. My heart began beating so fast. I couldn't take my eyes off of his. But the further I got away, the wider his smirk grew and his eyes stretched open even more. It almost looked as if he was excited by my fear. I finally made my way to the edge of the bed, and I just felt so overwhelmed in this moment of about a minute. But I kept scooting back, away from him, and the whole time he just watched. He didn't say anything. He didn't blink. He just watched me, and I was just in such a state of shock that I couldn't move. I finally was able to take my eyes off of his, and I just quietly turned around towards the front, facing forward. And I sat there for about a minute or two, just too afraid to look back at him. Keep in mind that this is a man that I had been in a relationship with for about 6 years. I met him when I was 12. He was my first kiss and my only real boyfriend. By this point, we had been living together for 5 months. And I just say that to say that he was no stranger. I was very comfortable around him, and this was the first time in the 8 years that I had known him that I had ever felt afraid. Something deeper was happening here. Something that scared me and confused me immediately. Something that I had no idea of what it was until later. So there I was, sitting at the edge of the mattress. I felt him approaching as I repeated in my head, "Don't look back, don't look back, don't look back." As if not looking back was going to help somehow. But it was just the only thing that I could think of at the time. Then I felt his hands on my shoulders. I didn't know what to say, so I just dropped my head towards my chest. Next, he pulled me back from sitting up to lying down on my back. By this time, my eyes were almost as wide as his, and all I could do was watch as he kissed my face in a circular motion. First my forehead, then my right cheek, then my chin, then my left cheek. And after the last kiss, he randomly started cracking up, just laughing. And let me tell you, at this point, I had heard this man laugh over 1,000 times, but this laugh was very different, to say the least, and unlike himself. Almost like it simply wasn't him, just the way that his voice deepened and the tone just completely changed to what the norm was. And not quite getting the joke, I just stuttered I'm all shaking, looking up at him. And I just said, "What's so funny?" And he quickly responded in that same deepened tone that I had never heard from him before. And he said, "I just can't believe that you're still letting me kiss you." Immediately I sat back up, and as I did, he got up and just smoothly strode out of the room. This is just the beginning of the longest night of my life. I was terrified, but at the same time very curious as to what was going on and what he was doing outside of the room. So I eventually got up and crept outside of the door to find him sitting on the couch in the living room in the dark. By this time, I had an overwhelming sense that he wanted to cause harm to me. but the pieces were still very scattered. Real quick side note, earlier in the week, my mom and I decided that it was time for me to come back home to Ohio. I went to Hampton University, which was very expensive, so I had to sit out for a semester. I worked at Red Lobster at night and McDonald's during the day, 6 days a week. By this point, it seemed as if I was just kind of wasting away my life as the naive and easily manipulated college dropout who worked 2 jobs and took care of an adult while he didn't do anything but drink, smoke, and rap. So mom was right. It was definitely time for me to go back home. But the plan was to drive home that Friday morning. So now back to Wednesday night. I tiptoed over to the couch, and I stood in front of him. And he still had that same blank, cold, scary stare. And I just immediately began pleading. I said, crying at this point, I said, look, I don't know what's going on here, but you don't have to do this. You really don't. I'll just go back to the room. I'll leave you alone. I'll wake up early and I'll just, leave tomorrow to go back home to Ohio. But please, you don't have to do this. You really don't. And then he was looking down as I was saying this. And as soon as I got done talking, he looked up at me very quickly and he was like, you ain't going nowhere until Friday. And I'll tell you what the translation for that was later, but at this point I still had no idea. Then he got up abruptly and walked into the kitchen. He went to the kitchen and I went to the bedroom to pack. Before the whole bed reveal, if that's what you want to call it, before he revealed what, before whatever was in him, before all that happened, we were just hanging out, eating, playing Speed Racer, and planning our last 2 days together. But all of a sudden, there was a strange shift in the atmosphere. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and all I knew was that I was leaving right now. I went to the bedroom and called my mom to tell her that I was coming home now and that I needed gas money in order to do so, because I didn't have $1 to my name. I made over like $3,000 a month, but because of this relationship, I didn't have not $1 to my name. But that's not the point. Anyways, the phone just kept ringing. I'm calling my mom. She's not answering. While I wait for her to answer, I put on my blazer in preparation to get on out of there. I called 3 times, but no answer. So in the meantime, he walks back in. I would say that they walked back in because I didn't have any understanding to anything spiritual or any evil presence on earth, but at this point it had become unmistakably obvious that I was no longer just facing just him, but also the demons that he invited to dwell inside of him. And I learned more about that later, about how he prayed daily to Satan in order to be inhabited by demons. Long story, but we'll get to that. So there he was, eyes stretched open as wide as possible, with a smirk that was even wider. There was no white in his eyes. His head was still slightly cocked to the side, and he was breathing very heavily. I hurried and grabbed a pair of scissors that were next to me to protect myself. The phone was still to my ear, and although my mom hadn't answered yet, I began to act as if she did. I held the scissors in the air and pointed them at him as I backed up to jerk open the blinds so that hopefully someone could see what was going on. Then I began speaking to the phone. I said, hey, Mom, yep, it's just me and him here. Nobody else, just the 2 of us. I'm standing in front of him right now. So if something happens to me, I want you to know that he did it. It's no one here but me and him. And I hoped that this would scare him from harming me by thinking that if something were to happen to me, she would know that he did it, so that would make him not do it. I don't know. But if only you could see the look that was in his eyes and the facial expressions that he made. It was indescribable, very demonically disturbing, to say the least. Moving forward a bit to bring a little more light to the story, later, God revealed to me the whole story. He did it through visions, what I would simply call downloading information, and through one other person who confirmed everything. He revealed it to one other person for confirmation. And that is that he had signed his name in blood with plans to sell his soul to the devil and to offer me as his blood sacrifice. He had been selected and prayed daily to Satan to be inhabited by demons. They were going to murder me that Friday. The plan was to kill me, burn my body, and throw it into the Chesapeake Bay. The cover-up was this. 20-year-old woman was on her way home from college and was in a tragic, fatal, fiery crash with a gasoline-carrying semi-truck. The accident caused her vehicle to fall off the Route 64 East Bridge into the water. She was pronounced dead at the scene. There have only been 2 times in my walk so far with the Lord when I knew that he was speaking to me, and it seemed as if it was almost audibly. The second time was when I met my Caleb, and God clearly said, "That's going to be your husband." But the first time was this. God revealed and clearly explained what was really going on. And he told the same exact thing to one other person as well. But I'll get to that later. But mind you, at this point, I still had absolutely no clue about God, who God was, or even that there was a God, except for one encounter about a week prior to this night. I'll elaborate quickly, as quickly as I can. But first, let me give a little more detail. Old boy was usually a pretty cool cat. In short, we usually had a good time around each other. However, for the last 6 months leading up to the final night, he was no longer the same person that I thought that I knew. See, 6 months earlier, he met a guy who was a self-proclaimed devil worshiper. This man would always talk to him about the Illuminati and Masonry and all that kind of mess, and he told him how he has everything that he wants because of his lifestyle choice to serve Satan. So he had informed him that he had been chosen, and if he just bowed and prayed to the devil, he would in short just prosper. I was in Miami with my best friend when I got the call from him. He was so excited to share with me everything that he had been learning. In short, he told me about secret societies, hidden symbolism, and how they're everywhere. Then a couple of days later, he was also informed that if he offered me as a blood sacrifice, he could, long story short, receive even more. So he agreed, and I know exactly when he did. I didn't know at the time, of course, but I got the call, the next call a couple of days later. It was a setup, to say the least. As soon as I answered, he was like, "Babe, I heard that there's this prayer that you can say every day to the devil and you can get whatever you want. You know, like Jay-Z and Beyonce and them did." I, ignorantly intrigued, said, "Really? Well, you know where I'm at with it." Meaning, since I didn't even believe that a God existed. So if he says that it'll work, go for it. Immediately, he hung up right after my last word. I brushed it off, didn't call back, and didn't even think anything else about it until the night. Later, God explained to me how, at that point, the plan went into play. Satan figured that since I encouraged the suggestion that I was simply an easy soul one, and that I was the perfect candidate for a blood sacrifice. Because why would God come and save me? That next week, all of a sudden, old boy wanted to come to Ohio for the summer. All of a sudden. I had been trying to convince this boy for the longest to come to Ohio, but he never wanted to. But now he had his reasons. He came down to quote unquote get started. Looking back, the plan was obvious from the beginning. He had been informed that the time was now to kill, steal, and destroy. And this is not the main point of the story, so I will not elaborate on every little detail, but the mission was clear. Everything that he was doing now was the complete opposite of the norm. He was very negative all of a sudden. He called me ugly, said I needed butt and breast implants, called me names, cursed at me, and didn't want me to do anything but be with him drinking and smoking and that kind of nonsense. He lied to all of my relatives about me by simply contradicting everything that I would say in order to make me look like a liar to them. He was basically assigned to steal my joy, confidence, self-respect, self-esteem, and any bit of value that I felt about myself. Then destroy all of my personal relationships and ties to other people to inevitably have me killed. In the midst of this time, he stopped saying, you know, little stuff like "I love you," stop calling me baby or mama or boo or whatever else. And then there was a song on a CD that he made and recorded about how much he quote unquote loved me, that he broke in half one day just randomly, just because. He was cutting all emotional ties to me while being the most evil and disrespectful person that I had ever met. He began being physically abusive as well. Once I had to call off of work for over a week until the wounds on my face were healed. But I pray to the Lord that the only reason why I was so silly and naive to stay with him during these times was because God's perfect will had to unfold exactly as it did. I don't know. I can only hope. But anyway, what I was getting into originally was my encounter with God a week prior to the final night, March 16, 2011. It was a Tuesday, and he and I were arguing. That is, if that's what you want to call it. Really, it was just him randomly screaming for literally no reason at all, calling me every name in and out of the book. And all I do was listen and cry while begging him to please just quiet down, because it was usually really late and the neighbors would always call the police. Speaking of which, once I had to spend a night in jail over this nonsense, but that's another story for another time. He was throwing his tantrum and I just couldn't take it anymore. So, sobbing like somebody died, barefoot with a busted lip, looking a hot mess, I just left the house. We lived right across the street from the beach, so I just headed over. My head was bowed low, tears were falling uncontrollably, and I was like literally weeping aloud. I made my way to the sand finally, and I was just so weak. I barely lifted my feet through the sand as I finally dragged my way to the water. And as soon as the waves hit my toes, I randomly began crying out to God. And when I say random, I mean random. You see, up until this point, I considered myself an atheist.